Hello everybody, this is Series 2, Live number 6, the final episode in this series of lives. Then we're going to take a break and I will be back in November when we start our next series of 6, which will have more of a leadership theme. So in this series, we have been talking about how do we connect with our teams, how do we make sure everyone has a voice, and how do we make sure that we are paying attention to the changes that we might need to make as a team? How do we capture those? And then how do we do something with them? Otherwise, they end up just being words on a page of a retrospective notebook. So we have talked about giving everyone a voice in collaborative spaces. We've talked about how to stay connected. We've talked about retrospectives and how to make those meaningful. And then last week, I started talking about ideas and capturing the ideas of the team. And we talked about using the retrospective. And then also, I introduced you to the concept of the idea board. Some people call it the scribble board, where you capture all of the ideas that the team has, and then you decide on what the priorities are for change. So, great. Now we've decided what the priorities are for change. What do we do with that? Well, every week for 12 lives, you all have seen the board behind me, and I occasionally reference it. But this is my personal Kanban board on how I manage work. And if you are collecting ideas for your team, you can use the same concept to do what I call an experimental backlog. Some people may call it an innovation backlog, depending on how you're using it, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to call it an experimental backlog. So you have all your ideas, and you see behind me on this side over here, it says ideas, and we've captured those in such a way that everyone understands what they are. Because when we scribble them down, they may not be completely thought out. But when we prioritize them, we're going to make sure that everyone on the team has a clear understanding of what that idea is. And then what you're going to do is get everyone together, look at the priorities, and have a bit of a brainstorming session, a think tank session, if you will. And for each idea, your group or your team is going to come up with ways that you may be able to realize that idea or that change. Sometimes there's a very clear idea that doesn't require a lot of discussion. And I believe I've been using coffee as an example, which is kind of funny because I don't drink coffee. But anyway, the coffee on Friday, virtual coffee on Friday, I've used that as an example. So if that's one of the ideas and it gets prioritized, you probably don't need to do an experiment and put it on the experimental backlog to come up with a way to organize Friday coffees. But if you have something more complex, then what you want to do is gather the team together and throw the idea out to everyone and let them brainstorm as many different ways that they think the idea could come to life. And then you go through that list and you say, okay, this is viable. We have the interest, we have the money, we have the time, we have the capabilities, or this one's not viable because it would require us to spend a lot of money and we know that's not in the budget right now, or this isn't viable because we don't have the right people to make it happen, or this one might work out, so we need to look at it. And you see what you're doing. You're having this conversation about the viability of the ideas. And those are becoming your hypotheses. What can we attempt to make our idea come true that we can experiment and see if it works? Now, here's how it works. Once we have our experiments, and you see on my board I have 3 colors because 3 priorities. Once you have your experiments, you put all of the ones you come up with for each of your priorities in your backlog, and then you prioritize those. So you had your 3 prioritized ideas, you're breaking them into experiments of what do we think we can do to make this idea a real thing, and you're putting those in priority order. Maybe you want to try 3 experiments for the same idea at one time, or maybe you want to try an experiment for each idea. And then you set a time limit. So if you do 2-week sprints because you're doing Scrum, maybe you want to do 2 weeks for your experiments. Often though, things that are going to be changed to culture end up being about a month-long experiment. And you're going to do those experiments of trying out these ideas for whatever time period you select. And at the end of that time period, you're going to bring the team together, all the interested parties. There may be a couple teams working on something together, but all the interested parties will come together, and you're going to have a review of the results. What happened when we did this experiment? And everyone that is participating gets a vote. Thumbs up, I think it went great. This is what we needed. It's working. Awesome. It was okay. It wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a huge success. And, oh, awful. Absolutely disaster. Anything that gets a thumbs up, my recommendation is it goes through another cadence cycle to make sure it wasn't a fluke that it worked the first time. Anything that was so-so and you're like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't awful, but it wasn't great, have a discussion with the team. Is there a way to improve on the experiment? And if there is, then run it again with the improvements. And for all of those things where you're like, no way, awful, worst idea we came up with in a long time, those things immediately get archived into the bin, never to be discussed again. Then you look at, so you've got, let's say you have one idea that was great, that's going to repeat. You have one idea that was so-so, that's going to repeat with improvements. And you have one idea that went totally wrong. So you have a blank space in your list. So you go to your priorities and you bring the next one over for the next cycle. And you just keep doing this. And I know this is a very complicated thing to do on a live without the visuals and being able to see it. But basically what you're doing is you're moving 3 experiments through the process of in progress, reviewing, and done. And for those that were successful, I recommend you put it through 2 cycles. If it is still successful at the end of 2 cycles, then it becomes a more permanent part of your culture. You implement the change. So let's use the coffee break as an example. Let's say we actually did need to do the experiment because nobody was sure how it was going to work. And the idea was that every Friday at 10 o'clock, we were going to take a break from our work and we were going to have virtual coffee. So we did this every Friday during the cycle. The cycle was a month, so we had 4 Fridays. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Some people forgot that we were supposed to be doing it. Some people didn't bring coffee. The conversation turned back to work instead of staying more social. So when we do our review, we talk about those things. And we ask ourselves, could we make this better? And if we could, what would we do to make it better? And then we decide, if we can make it better, should we run the experiment for another cycle to see if we improve it? So the coffee one got the idea, and we said we could improve on it. So for another month, which is our experiment cycle, we're going to attempt to have Friday coffee with the changes that we made. Maybe we decided 9:30 instead of 10. Maybe we decided, somebody was going to have to be the adult and say, guys, why are we talking about work? Or I don't want to talk about work. Maybe we say it's okay if people don't bring their cup of coffee, but everybody does need to be on video. So you talk through those things and you run the experiment again. And at the end of it, you do the review and you vote. So if on the second cycle, the Friday coffee works out so much better and it gets the thumbs up, then because it was only mediocre the first time, you're going to want to go another time. Remember, you want everything to be proven 2 times. So we want to make sure that we have success. before we say, you know what, Friday coffee is now a thing. It's now a part of our lives until such time as we do inspect and adapt and decide that Friday coffees aren't a thing anymore because maybe we want Friday pizza instead. So I know it's silly to use the coffee example, but it seems like one that people can relate to on how we can experiment. But again, the idea is to take your visions, your ideas, prioritize them, and then come up with experiments that you do for a set period of time to prove out if those are things that you want to do. And you can use those for making changes in how your team does professional development, how they change how they work together, cultural changes they want to make. And the great thing about doing this is if you do something with your team that you think could benefit the entire company, you now have done the legwork. You've done the homework and you have the evidence to go to corporate leadership and say, look, we tried Friday coffee. Here's what we did that worked. Here's what we did that didn't work. And here is our recommendation because we think this would be a great thing for the whole company to change the employee experience at the company. So you can use that as a look, we're not just throwing out ideas. We've actually tested them and they work. We'd like to try it with a larger sample or a larger group. You can do the same thing at the corporate level if you have a change committee and do the experiments. But again, instead of issuing a corporate policy, starting next week, everyone will wear blue on Wednesday, you can experiment with a smaller part of the company. And if wearing blue on Wednesday is really successful with that small sample, then you may want to go to a bigger sample, and then eventually you want to make it part of the corporate culture that on Wednesdays everyone is going to wear blue. So I think you get the idea here of how we can make this work. I've written a blog about how you can use it to change remote work culture. Boy, that was telling given what happened this year. And I do teach this as part of our leadership series that's coming out at the beginning of the year that addresses how we introduce change into our organization. So between now and then, I will be writing more about it, talking more about it, creating posts with some steps for you guys to follow. But if you do have questions in the meantime, because this sounds like something that you would really like to do, please reach out to me through our usual social channels. On Facebook, where you're watching me now. On LinkedIn, you can send me a direct message. On Instagram, I know it's a bit harder to chat there, but I'll put as many tips as I can. And keep an eye out for our upcoming programs where this will be part of the agenda at learning.agilityforall.com. In the meantime, over the next couple of weeks while we're on our break, before we start Series 3 of Lives, I will be taking the highlight reel from the first season and the second season of Lives, and I will be posting them on all of our different channels so that you can interact. You can watch on replay if you want a reminder of what's been said, share and ask questions. And also, if that sparks something for you and you have an idea for a future tip that you would like me to give you, whether it be through a live or a blog or just a post on LinkedIn, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to do that. Because at the end of the day, I started doing these because I wanted to be able to provide you all with nuggets of information in 15-minute periods of time where you can start thinking about these things, ask questions, and implement them. And all of them are topics that I cover in more detail in our longer programs as well. So it gives you a little bit of an exposure to that. But this has been, a weird ride for me because I've never done lives before. But we just finished episode 12. And I will see all of you on replay and then back here in November for Series 3, which is going to be about leadership. So have a great week, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.